Okay, Assalamu alaikum, peace be upon you all. Welcome to this live stream. Today I have with me Faisal Ali, who is into psychiatry, right, Faisal?
That's my job. Yeah, that's what I do.
Yeah, and we will be discussing um, science or faith, what comes first. And we have had some discussions about different topics over
Yeah.
social media. And I think the question would be maybe which takes priority, or if there is a contradiction, what takes precedence?
Yeah, that's
I
how I
would
understand it.
explain,
Yeah, I don't
right?
think we mean what did people have science and then develop faith, centuries later or something. I think it's how you, if there's a conflict, first of all, can they come into be into conflict? And if there's conflict, how do you resolve it? That's how I understand the question. That's good because I don't think we discussed ahead what we're actually going to talk about, but it seems like we understood the exact, actually what we're going to talk about. So.
Yeah, so Faisal has a presentation here that he's gonna be going through, and maybe would you first introduce yourself,
Yeah,
Faisal, and then
so
we go to the presentation?
Okay, so I live in Toronto, Canada. As you mentioned, I'm a psychiatrist by training. I do work at one of our teaching hospitals here, the Center for Addiction and Mental Health. I work in an outpatient clinic that primarily treats schizophrenia. Then I also have a private practice that's a general psychiatry practice. I do have an academic appointment with the University of Toronto because it's a teaching hospital. I'm not a real hardcore academic. I don't do like teaching. I don't do like lots of research or publications or anything, but I do some teaching of other psychiatric residents and trainees and things like that. So I don't want to, that's really the extent of my academic activities. How we probably got involved into how we crossed paths, kind of, I guess, a hobby of mine is engaging in discussions. I have many hobbies, but one of them is engaging in discussions of issues around science and religion and faith, and on through social media, Facebook, various forums, and things like that. Um, One particular concern of mine is that I think that it's always important. General public science, scientific literacy on the part of the public is always an important thing, but I think we're at the point of our history as a species where it's a very literally an existential issue now. Like the most immediate threat facing us right now is of course the COVID-19 virus, and that is an issue where it should have been a very not simple, but seems like it was a manageable problem. We know how to contain the virus. We know use mass social distancing, work on a virus. The vaccine was produced in amazingly short time, and that should have been in the end of it. We just get everyone vaccinated, keep doing the other interventions until enough people get vaccinated, and we're done. We're out of it. It's not working that way. And why is that? Because the part about getting people vaccinated and doing the social distancing, people are not doing that. They're coming up with their own ideas, saying, "Well, vaccine is going to kill me. It's worse than the virus." Blah blah blah. You know what I'm talking about. So I think it's important that we do what we can to combat that. And then the more not quite immediately pressing, but ultimately I think more important pressing issue is climate change, obviously, and that's going to be, that is already like kind of on the background of COVID-19. Now we have record heat waves. I don't know what it's been like in Egypt, but here in North America, it's been quite horrible, and forest fires and floods and all sorts of biblical and catastrophes are now befalling us, and these are things that we have caused. We should have prevented them. We still might be at a place of being able to prevent them, but again, resistance against the scientific knowledge is really the main problem with that. I think we know what we can do to stop these things. We're not doing them because not enough people really understand and accept. So that's one thing I think important. And I think one of the reasons, it's a very complex reason why people are resistant to scientific facts and knowledge. And one thing is this idea that we're going to talk about today, is that sometimes there are things that people hold on faith that they see as conflict in things that are true scientifically, and so they have to choose between the two, and often people will choose faith over science. So I think that's part of what we're discussing here. Obviously, it's not the only reason, because lots of people have strange ideas about their health and science and stuff not related to religion, but it's one factor. So that's kind of how we ended up here, I think, you and I here. So
let's
you know, not, and to be clear, if someone is watching for the first time your channel, I don't believe you're a person who denies the COVID by vaccine 19 or climate change or anything like that. As far as I know, I don't think that's something that you have any. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe that's something you've ever stated, that you have any skepticism or.
No, I don't really address those topics. So I focus.
So I don't want to give that impression that that's
Yeah.
something you and I have disagreed over.
Yeah. So let's go to the presentation. How about that?
Okay, sure.
So
okay.
Here we go. So Faisal is going to go through a presentation about his idea about faith and science, and we're going to stop after each few points and see what we can find out.
Okay.
So Faisal, epistemologically or theologically, you are taking which position concerning faith? Because this is about faith and science, right?
Yeah. So so just to spoiler alert the whole thing. My position is that faith and science can be in conflict, and that is because faith is often perceived or taken as a means of obtaining knowledge, and I don't believe it is. I think there can be things that are believed that are true, but if they are true, it's not from faith that you know they are true. Whereas science is something not infallible, and we can certainly be wrong, but it is a means by which we can approach and gain knowledge. So I think if there's a conflict between the two, you go with the science. That's bottom line the position.
So would you describe yourself as a theist, an atheist, or an agnostic, or you wouldn't like to comment on that?
Atheist, I would say atheist. Yes.
Sorry.
I guess that's atheist. I guess I would say my position is I do not believe there is reason to believe in God. So I don't take the position that I can disprove there is a God, but I don't. My position is if there's something that major and that important that you don't have reason or evidence to believe in it, then you should go about your life as if it does not exist.
Okay, so you are somewhere between an agnostic and soft atheist.
I guess so. Yeah.
Okay.
I would, personally, I think atheist is it. Like I use the more general term of atheist lacking knowledge in God, but that's a whole other kettle of fish. I don't think we want to can of worms. Yeah. I guess I don't think we want to open that one. That'll take us.
Let's go through the presentation.
Okay, so so as I think we discussed before, just before we went live, what when we say faith and science, which comes first, we mean epistemologically or in terms of priority. Like if there's a conflict, it's not like which people started believing first, faith or science. So that is So I'm glad we understood it the same way, because we didn't actually have the chance to discuss it. So that's what I'm questioning. So I'm going to kind of discuss my my understanding of what science is. So I don't think it's. I mean, there are things like chemistry and physics and biology on those things, and those are I don't think anyone doubts those are science. But I think generally in this for the sake of this discussion, I'm using a more broad definition of science, which is the method of obtaining knowledge by applying logic and math and reason to things we can actually observe and measure and obtain empirical evidence from our senses. So we look at the world, we see whatever means we have, not literally looking with our eyes, but anything, knowledge, data, perceptions we can obtain from the physical material world around us, and then try to make sense of that using logic, test, experiment, mathematics, and that's how we know things. So what is faith? Now, this is how I'm going to say that for my purpose, I'm going to define faith as a belief or a set of beliefs that are held with a degree of certainty or a high degree of conviction, to the point that the person who holds faith treats it as knowledge. So you can look up in the sky and say, the sky is blue. That's something I know. Then you can say, Allah is the one and true God, that is something I know. It's not something I have an opinion on. It's something the person of faith will take as a fact about the world. But it's not something that is known by the same means as we know through science. So it was often felt the people who hold something on faith will often see this as something that has been revealed to them personally or mankind collectively by a god or another supernatural being. And the reason it's treated as knowledge is because this other being is felt to be in a position to know it. Maybe because he's omniscient, he knows everything, or this happens to be something he knows. So it's kind of like, if I ask you what's the weather in Cairo, I don't know what it is, but you can tell me. So then I'll say, okay, Ahmed told me, he's in position to know, so now I know. If God is in a position to know and he tells you, now you have knowledge, but it's not something that I have actually gone to Cairo and seen for myself. It's not something you can actually see for yourself. Is that how you understand faith, or do you have a different definition or understanding?
Yeah, it's. I think the point here is, how would you reach a position of faith?
Yes.
So you say it's a belief or set of beliefs held with certainty or a high degree of conviction.
Yes.
So the question would be whether faith is reasonable or not.
Mm-hmm.
Is how did one reach this position of certainty or high degree of conviction then? So there would be faiths that are, that somebody has reached in a way that makes the faith well grounded, and other ways where you are going to believe in something without proper reasons, and then it will take you into problems. So I think this is the main point.
Yeah.
So I would more or less disagree with your third point, which is not believed on basis of evidence typically required for scientific knowledge.
Okay.
Because for example, in my case, but maybe we'll postpone that until we go more into the presentation, I would say that I can trace my faith to evidence based on which I have faith in God, for example. So yeah. But let's so
I would say that's so I think the disagreement would be over, first of all, whether you actually have that evidence, but then that would fall under, I would say, that's science. And then, because otherwise I don't see why we divide these two things, because if it's a physical evidence you can draw from the world or from your senses or whatever, then I would say that's not a different thing, right?
Yeah,
so anyway, let's go on and go on.
Yeah, the topic here is that okay. So let me tell you this. Let me tell you. I believe that, for example, Faisal is telling the truth. Okay.
Right.
You cannot do an experiment on Faisal unless you put him on a lie detector or something, right?
Right.
But if I am basing this belief on dealing with Faisal once and twice and third time and 20 times, and I compare what he has said to what has turned out to be the reality, and then I have the belief that he is a truthful person, then this is a justified belief, right or not?
Right. Sorry,
yeah.
Sorry.
So for example, if I have faith in God, for example, based on Islam, and I test the way of life, for example, of Islam, and find that it's consistent with my human nature, it gives me peace. If I test things that are said in the Quran that are, pointing to specific cosmological or physical or biological phenomena, and I find that it has insight, it's giving insight about that could not have been otherwise, given by somebody who lived 1400 years ago, etc., etc. And these things, whenever I go through one of those things, I end up reconfirming my initial belief. Then you build faith that is more, strongly grounded into evidence. This is the whole trick,
Right.
Yeah.
But then, so what is faith? Like, how is that different? Like, if you believe you believe the Quran is the revealed word of Allah because there are things that come out of it and are, whatever, you can test them and you think, how is that different from holding any other hypothesis and then testing it with evidence and saying, okay, that's true, or I think it's 60% true, or I think it's almost certainly true, or
because there is a percent of subjectivity there. All right.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say, for example, that one of the teachings is that, for example, the rich should give that much percentage of their money to the poor. Okay.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And somebody who is, for example, a capitalist,
right,
okay, would tell you, well, if the poor did not work for it, they don't earn it, we shouldn't give any part of our money to the poor. Okay, this is his point of view.
Right.
Okay, it will take an experiment for 100 years where, for example, a capitalist country will have problems with the poor after some time, social unrest, for example, or the other side, like a communist country having a problem with not having any people who are rich because they have done completely the other way around.
Right.
Myself as a Muslim would say, okay, so Islam or the Quran has put a system that has the balance. It didn't even take so much, just 2.5%, for example. And this is good. Somebody can live with it, and it provides this balance. I believe that this is a good thing. But maybe somebody who did not go through the experience will disagree and want to try it out.
Yeah.
So there is a level of subjectivity there, and this is why it remains being called faith. I would see the level of subjectivity as very small. Somebody can see it as bigger, So that's why.
Okay. So do you say, like, do we include? So you say, as a Muslim, I believe in the concept of charity. It's one of the pillars. And I think it's good. And some extreme capitalist says, no, everyone should pull up their bootstraps and be by themselves. Are those both faith positions then, even if though there's nothing supernatural or spiritual or whatever about the capitalists, and neither of these have been tested out to see which is true?
Yeah, the issue is I will be basing my position related to paying zakat, paying alms, for example, in this case, on faith. God says this is something that you should do. And God says what I tell you is good. So I will believe that it is good, whether I have tested it or not. Okay?
Right.
Because I have other reasons to believe that God exists and that he is good and that he is wise. If you look, for example, into the writings of people like Thomas Malthus, he will say that the poor do not deserve the right to live. Right. If they are poor, if they are sick, if they do not have the means to make themselves better, then let them die. Okay? It's very awful, but it's a theory, and people almost accepted it for some amount of time.
Right.
And, he's basing it on formulas or on natural selection. If those people were good enough, they would have had good means and they would have been earning their living. So if they are sick or disabled or so on, let's get rid of them. God does not say that, because there is purpose in this life and he wants the poor to live, because this life is not about being rich or being poor. There is dignity in humanity, for example. So he wants to give them the chance, even if they don't have the material means. So there will be these points, and even in the bigger beliefs, like I believe in God, he exists because I think that there is principle of sufficient reason and the universe needs a creator, but I cannot bring him to the lab. So somebody will say, maybe the universe is eternal. Not me nor him can go back eternity back and see if the universe is eternal or not. So there will be appealing to logic. If I say I accept causality and somebody says I do not accept causality, it stops there. What can you do? Because science is silent about some issues, even they are very obvious. Like causality, for example, is very obvious, philosophical and logical.
I'm not so sure about that.
But maybe you will tell me mechanics will, some interpretations would say that some events are non-causal, etc.
I'm not.
So at the end,
there's a whole philosophical literature on causality and what is causality, and you dig down to it and you realize we really don't know what that is. So I'm not sure if that's so obvious.
At the end, sometimes something that I will see so obvious, you will not see so obvious, because of something, okay, because of specific interpretation. And then I will say it's based on a fact, or a very clear logical axiom. You will say, but it's doubtful because there might be some empirical evidence that suggests otherwise, and I will not change my epistemic position until this phenomena is resolved, for example. So in this case, for example, you will say science is agnostic about it. I will not believe it. I will say, if you don't want to call it science, I will call it faith. I will believe it anyway. Because some things can never be tested empirically. So yeah.
Okay. So that's a situation where there is no conflict because you think science it's not something that we can as yet determine the answer. There's no scientific answer to that as yet, or maybe in principle there can be no scientific answer.
Sometimes there are things where there cannot be an answer, and you will have to deal with them based on, let's say, best effort or best knowledge or best intuition.
Right.
And some of those things are somebody who is a methodological naturalist will classify them as faith, maybe. I don't know.
Okay. Anyway, maybe I'll go on to the next next slide.
Let's go.
Okay. So there's one. I just put this up as an example of one approach to the question of what do you do when there is a apparent conflict between what you believe you know through faith and what you believe is known through science. And this is, Ken Ham on the left is a fairly well-known Christian apologist and creationist, a young Earth creationist. So he believes the Earth is 4,000 years old. He believes there was a real flood that covered the entire world and wiped out everything on Earth except for the small number of animals that were, pretty large number of animals, but small percentage of them, organisms that were on Noah's Ark. Then that evolution is not true. So all of these are at conflict with the consensus of scientific knowledge. I would go and say these are completely wrong. There's no truth to any of these. Science is quite clear and speaks quite clearly on this. His approach is there cannot be any contradiction. Anything that contradicts his understanding of scripture is wrong. So that if there is something in science that says this, that's wrong. You don't believe that. Science says the Earth is 4 point something billion years old. Scripture says it's 6,000 years old. The Earth is 6,000 years old. It's not 4 billion years old. That's just wrong. There's an interesting thing I find about this type of position, because they don't because the Answers in Genesis doesn't just deal with scripture. They actually do or try to do scientific research. They have this website, Answers Research Journal, which is supposedly a scientific journal, and they publish articles that look just like real scientific articles. They have abstracts, they have authors and titles, sciencey words like about chromosomes and molecular clocks and things like that. It looks like science. If you actually read them and you understand anything to do with the topics they discuss, it's garbage. It's like, they get their facts wrong, their arguments wrong, everything is wrong. It's not, if they submitted this to a journal for publication, they would be laughed out of the room. It's just, rubbish science. But what I find interesting about this is they don't seem to believe, they don't quite put their money where their mouth is. For instance, for me, I say if there is a conflict between faith and science, you go with science. So if I have, I believe the science is quite solid that the Earth is 4 billion years old, and also quite clear, if it was quite clear that the Bible says the Earth is 6,000 years old, well, that's wrong. The Bible is wrong. Science is right. I don't feel like I need to go and say, okay, well, I'm going to do my own research on the Bible and say that, well, the Bible actually says it's 4 billion years old and there is no conflict because these are both forms of knowledge, and there can't be two forms of knowledge that say different things. So in a way, these the younger people like this are actually saying that it leads to them doubting and denying and having to do mental convolutions to deny the things that that are true about science, because they see faith as a means of knowledge. They also accept science as a means of knowledge, and so they have to somehow reconcile this, and they are more tied, and I would say emotionally, psychologically, whatever, but not rationally tied to their faith position, so that they have to somehow reconstruct or reinterpret the scientific evidence to be consistent with their faith position.
Can I comment on that?
Of course.
Yeah. So I think a major issue here, a major issue here, it's a compounded problem. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So number one, let's say we have faith, but not every faith, as I gave in the introduction, not every faith will be, a well-grounded faith.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say this, that for example, when you look at the Bible, whether the Old or the New Testament, but it's even more difficult in the New Testament. But let's look at the Old Testament, for example, where it has gone through a very long time, entrusted in the hands of people, and the very original Ten Commandments or the original Torah is not what is there today in the Bible. There are things in the Bible and chapters in the Bible that it is obvious that it is somebody who is telling a story. It is not a prophet saying something and not God saying something. Somebody writing, and this king was born in that year, and then he had first child was named so and so, and the second and the third, and then he went to this place, and then he did this, and then he did that. It's a normal narration, okay?
Right.
And so this is the first thing. So I think someone looking at scripture should have a strong position of faith towards something that is obviously the word of God or the word of a prophet, an authenticated one. Okay. The second.
How do you authenticate a prophet? I think the Christian or the believer in the Bible, in the inerrancy of the Bible, will say that it was guided, or somehow, God inspired them to write these things, or guided how it was produced and made sure that everything is correct. Like, I don't really know how I understand your position is that, the Quran is the direct revelation from God, and the Bible is a corrupted revelation that has been, if I understand, and that's kind of your position, the standard Islamic position, that there is revelation within the Bible, but it is not pure revelation. It's been added and edited and modified by humans over time, right?
Yeah. So let's look for example at the Bible. There isn't a specific statement in the Bible that says that humans, or there is a promise from God, for example, that no human can add or remove something from the Bible. And obviously, there cannot be such thing, because, for example, the whole New Testament is a best effort basis narration of people who did not even live or see Christ, completely different, for example, than the case of the Quran. So somebody who is taking a position that non-errancy of the Bible is not basing this position on the Bible. He is basing it on his own thing. So if you want to you believe that God exists, and you believe that Judaism or Christianity is true, then your position should be, I should look into God's words, the Ten Commandments, for example, or specific something that is very clearly a revelation from God, and see if God is promising, for example, that the Torah will never be changed, or that Psalms will never be changed, or that this and that is going to be his word until the end of time. Those kind of statements are not there. Then it is giving somebody the responsibility to make sure, for example, if he's a Christian and he's looking at different gospels, then it is his responsibility now to find which gospel is more authentic and which translation is better, because the original language is completely lost. Jesus talked Aramaic, and what we have is Greek and Latin and then other languages. So somebody must think which is a good translation. So even when you look at the Quran, for example, you have a specific ayah in Arabic, and then people are doing best effort translation to English. You can have 60 translations. It depends on how good somebody is speaking English or how good he understands Arabic and so many things. So it becomes my responsibility, if I'm an English-speaking Muslim, or I am an English-speaking Christian who wants to explore Islam, either to go and learn Arabic, and then I do not need to go to the translations, or I will have to do very serious research, because this translation says something completely different.
Can I just interrupt here? Because I think we're going, I think it's okay to have kind of a freewheeling conversation, but I think we should try to stay focused. We have, you're a Muslim, I'm an atheist. We're discussing which is better, Quran, which is more accurate. You have William, or which is more accurate, right?
Yeah, this is not the point.
You have William Lane Craig coming on in a few weeks, I understand, correct?
Yeah.
Maybe ask him how he reconciles it, because he's going to give a much better defense of. I'm not interested. First of all, I'm not interested in defending the Bible, because I think what you say is true. But maybe better to have that discussion with him, because I think that would be a much more interesting discussion.
Yeah,
how he
is
able to understand the Bible as the revealed word of God.
The point that I'm making is this: it's not whether the Bible or the Quran or the Torah are better or not. Yeah. It is that when you are looking at a specific book, a specific scripture, a specific piece of text, of which the complete non-errancy has been given to humans, and even the scripture itself does not say that it is 100% airtight versus human errors, then you should be, you have some criticality. For example, what you are saying here about young earth. I have seen Christians, for example, I have had some discussions on this channel with Joshua Somidas, and I have read his book. And in his book, he explains many of the verses in the Bible.
Yeah.
And he says that it does not directly say whether the earth is 4 billion or 4,000 or 6,000 years.
Yeah.
It is actually somebody's opinion in the church at some point of time. That those mean that it is 6,000 years.
Right.
But you can have other interpretations. So there are, and if you're looking at Genesis, you're actually looking more at the side of the Torah or the side of Judaism, not actually Christianity. So the trick is, when there is conflict, very obvious conflict between science and religion, maybe the first thing somebody will do is the third thing, to make sure that this is really what religion says, and to make sure that this is really what science says, before he puts himself in a position of conflict.
Yeah, and my position is that a book written by someone or someone's sometime, generally way in the past, is never by itself a source of knowledge. I mean, what you know about that is this person. You can maybe what the person wrote, and maybe it's describing some historic events, and then you have to kind of test the reliability of it. But if it's talking about something that you cannot test, cannot know, then this is not something that I see justified to say, okay, like you can talk about, is zakat a good thing? Okay, that I can test. Are there angels? Well, if I'm a Muslim, I have to believe in angels, even if I've never seen an angel or felt an angel or experienced an angel, and no one has, and there's no evidence. I have to believe in angels because this revelation apparently says there are angels and there are jinn, and I have to believe in these things. And I think that's the point of one of the points of disagreement here. Is that's just because even if like there are lots of other things that are true and accurate, that's still not adequate, because you can't say the book isn't inerrant just because you haven't found a mistake in it, because how do you determine something is an error? Maybe it's 99.999% accurate, but it was got the thing about angels wrong. So how do you know that, right? That's kind of my position.
This is an important point, and it relates actually to the nature of religions.
Yeah.
So if I am adopting Islam, for example, or somebody else is adopting Christianity, or somebody else is adopting Judaism or Hinduism or whatever, I don't think that any reasonable person is adopting a specific religion because the religion is telling him something about science. Because this is not the function of religion.
Yes.
The function of religion is giving you, I think, few things. Number one, a way to an afterlife where you would like to be at the better side, right? Not the bad side. Okay.
Right.
And a system of ethics. Okay.
Yes.
And a system of dealing of transacting with people,
right,
in a fair way, because it is put by somebody who is unbiased, by somebody who is not human. Okay, so God is neither on the poor side or the rich side, because he created everybody. Okay. So he doesn't want to take my money, and he is not, the relative of the other poor guy. He is not neither male or female. So if he says these are the rights of this party or that party, then he's not doing it because he's being against or with anybody. This is the right of the ruler, and this is the right of the subjects. The same thing. So I think the problem here is that some people go to unnecessary lengths in dealing with religion. Religion is. It is for those three things: for salvation, for having morality, and for having a fair transactional system between human beings.
Yeah.
And part of the proof of its authenticity, that there should not be an unequivocal statement in the authenticated scripture of one religion that is directly in conflict with an undisputed scientific fact. So this becomes, like evidence or like clues that the one who is speaking those words in scripture is the creator of the universe. Because, if I'm talking to you about psychiatry and you say a statement, just passing by something, and I open the book, I expect to find it correct in the literature of psychiatry, right or not?
Right.
If I find it completely against it, then I will doubt that you are a psychiatrist, right? Mm-hmm. So if I am having a religion, and for example, the Quran is very clear that it is the unchangeable word of God, okay? And there is an unequivocal statement in the Quran, for example, that says that Earth is a cube, let's say, or it's, a rectangle, something like this. Mm-hmm. And I am sure it is not a cube or a rectangle. And there is no other explanation for that verse. It is very clear that it is talking about a rectangle. Let's say, then I have to doubt, because I know that it has at least some curvature, and I know that a rectangle is not like a circle.
Yeah. Okay. So we're in agreement that the Earth is round and not a cube.
Of course.
Or triangle pyramid.
Of course.
Is the Quran unequivocal on the position of human ancestry with other organisms on Earth? By your interpretation.
Yeah. So the Quran is, for example, unequivocal that genealogically humans will all have to end up with Adam and Eve. Okay. It is very clear on that the grand, I'm not sure how many grand I should put, but the grandfather of Ahmed and Faisal, we will have both to end up with Adam, and we will have to both end up with Eve. This is very clear in the Quran.
Yeah.
Now I have talked, for example, with some person like Joshua Swamidas, for example, that who believes in evolution. Okay.
Right.
And there are some people who are Muslims who also believe in evolution, and they believe in something called Adamic exceptionalism, for example.
Yeah, I just ran across that just recently, and I brought it to
Yeah.
Joshua's attention because I think it was around the same time. Like I think it was published before he published his book, but I don't think it was before he was thinking about this and starting to write about it in a less formal way. So it's interesting how. So that's kind of okay. So
Yeah.
what's your beef with
I mean,
evolution then? If you don't think that we need the common answer, what is your beef with evolution, if I may say?
no, because I don't accept their argument.
Okay.
Yeah, but
So this is,
even
yeah, I mean, this is where we've had a pretty genial conversation. Maybe this is where we went, because yeah, I don't know. Like, I deliberately did not want to have a specifically scientific, because I'm not a scientist, you're not a scientist, so it'd be like a couple football fans talking about football, which can be kind of fun and interesting, but we're just spectators. We're not in the game. Um, all I can say
yeah,
is, we've had a number of back and forth, both on various medium, and I don't know how kindly to say this. You just don't really understand the science that well. The things you talk about, the papers you present as presenting one point, they make another point than what you think they're making, and I just don't. So I'm a little. So like maybe. So I'm just wondering why that is. Like, I mean, I guess I'm basing my statement on a premise I don't think you're going to accept, because I think Ken Ham does not accept the age of the Earth, because his faith requires that his reading of the Bible is that the Earth is 6,000 years old, and that's wrong. The Earth is not 6,000 years old. Now, evolution is a fact. It's just I know you disagree. You're wrong. It's a fact. And
yeah.
if
Let
it's
me
not a
comment.
requirement, but then so I'm kind of a little confused, because it doesn't really go with my thesis. My thesis is that people do this because of their faith, but if your faith is not that evolution is wrong, then why are you go to such lengths to misread the scientific evidence to make it look like it will to convince yourself that it's wrong? And I do like that's a leading question, and there's all sorts of assumptions. I don't think they're assumptions. I think they're demonstrably true, but I understand you're not going to accept them, and I don't know how we can resolve them here without going into like reading a bunch of articles that you and I are probably not expert enough to really dig into anyway. But
So let's say in the context of what we are discussing, we have two examples here, right? One example that I would think is almost a scientific fact, that the Earth is round, for example.
right.
And I would refer, for example, to the Quran. And for example, now there is this best rifle, okay, is mentioning an ayah in the Quran which says يكور الليل على النهار ويكور النهار على الليل. And what it means is that Allah causes the night and the day to alternate spherically. Okay, and it uses exactly this word, yukawwir, which means make like a ball. Okay, yukawwir something is make something like a ball or like a sphere.
Okay.
So, very clear scientific fact, and one ayah that has been mentioned since 1400 years ago. Maybe people at that time did not know that the Earth is spherical or not, but they would take this as, just they will look into the alternation aspect rather than it is having a physical implication. But when today we understand that it also has a physical implication, when we return to the ayah, we find the same sign. There is other, for example, ayat that talks like وَالْأَرْضَ بَعْدَ ذَلِكَ دَحَاهَا, and the earth after that he made like an ostrich egg. Okay, and an ostrich egg has actually this difference in how the sphere looks. It's a little positive from one side and a little, and even
not
even
the Earth,
we know that
not shaped like an ostrich egg. The Earth is obligate spheroid, but it's not like pointy, right?
It's not pointed.
The whatever
not pointed like that. It's but it is not a very. It is not a very. It's not a perfect. It's not a perfect sphere.
It's a perfect sphere either. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I mean, this is one example. But then the other example.
But you said, then you said the people at the time First of all, I'm not sure I'm not sure when this belief started to. I don't really know if 1400 is really that late for people to start to know that the Earth was a sphere. I'm not sure. I don't know if that was like something that was radical at that time. But your point is that the early Muslims who read this didn't say, "Hey, wow, yeah, Allah is telling us the Earth is like a globe, and that's why there's night and day because it spins around." Oh wow, this is actually what I'm going to come on the next slides. Actually, as it turns out, so they took it as metaphorical, right?
Yeah,
Then it seems to fit into something we know by science. So I say, hey, it's not metaphorical. He's really giving us a science lesson. But if it was like a real science lesson, or not a science lesson, but kind of just a hint that God knows stuff that we don't know because he's making these mentions, just kind of like I might mention something that I happen to know, not to inform you, but just because So it's not. I'm not saying he's trying to teach us science there. That is not clearly not what the Quran is about. But if you're going to look at it as evidence, but then you're kind of treating it like, okay. But then there's also this well-known, and I don't think this is a sound argument, but there's this well-known argument about. Some people will point to, I can't remember which surah, but it's a story that Muhammad is recounting about the sun going down in a muddy pond, and people will say, well, that shows that it's there is no that's scientifically wrong. The sun doesn't set in a muddy pond. And I think correctly, my understanding, this is just a story that Muhammad is recounting, a legend about some other figure who may have been Alexander the Great or something. I can't remember exactly. But the point is, so everyone takes this as a metaphor or a legend or something. But suppose we had found that, hey, guess what? You know what happens to the sun at night? It goes onto a muddy pond. Then the Muslims will say, "Oh my, look, it's a miracle. It's a scientific miracle. No one knew this, and then it was in there." So I don't think you can use that as an argument. If there was something like the Schrodinger equation was in there, or Maxwell's something really specific that no one could have known, or if there was
Great. So let me.
But it would show us that someone had written this. That it could be hyper intelligent aliens or something. So there's still always a way around it. But it would certainly show that whoever wrote this knew stuff that no one else knew at that time. But I just don't think that's a compelling argument. I mean, the language is too poetic and too metaphorical, and it's always like the other one. People talk about the sky stretching or something like that, and that's the Big Bang. But no one knew about the Big Bang. And like, if that was true, then the ancient during the Arab flowering, intellectual flowering of Islam, Islam was the leading source of science. They would have come up with the Big Bang theory because it would have been, hey, Allah told us about the Big Bang, and now we can, So I don't know. It's just
those are very important comments. So let me comment on those. Do you want to go to the slide or?
Yeah. Why did I go? Just put it.
Yeah. So maybe you can go to the slide, and we can continue that when you are on that slide. So here it is.
Okay. Yeah. So here's one of my favorite bits of writing on the relationship between science and faith. And it's just on a web post, it's just on a blog. This guy, Lance Parkin, who's a science fiction writer who, to be honest, I haven't read a lot by him, but I think he's written like scripts for Doctor Who and things like that. And he wrote this article called Above Us Only Sky, where he says, and I think he makes a convincing case that there is one theological question that has bothered humanity more than anything else. Starting from the beginning of history, the earliest writings and artifacts we have to today, but not including today, that has bothered more people. And it's not whether there was a God, because for most of our history, people just assumed there was a God or gods of some sort. So people didn't question, is there a God? How do we prove there's a God? This was just part of the world they assumed was there. But he says this is a question that has bothered people. They had to really think how to solve it. But it's been answered. This is a theological question that is no longer discussed or debated. It's because everyone knows the answer to it. Even even elementary school kids know the answer to that question. And that question is, where does the sun go at night? And he argues that if you go through them, like the earliest gods were sun gods, and every ancient religion has its sun god. Like for instance, there's in Mesopotamia, there's Utu, or also goes by Samash, and ancient Egypt had Ra, the god of sun god there. Ancient Greeks had Helios, who's depicted here. He goes on so this was a big question. Like you need to know what the sun is. Everything depends on the sun, so you need to come up with an explanation. And the explanation they came up was a god pulls the sun across the sky in a chariot. There's some sort of battle or conflict that happens every night that ends up with the sun coming again. And every night the god happens to win this battle, and the sun comes up the next day. Now, we don't, these gods, and there's there's sun gods, but there are all sorts of other gods. There's gods for other important phenomena, like Thor, the god of thunder, who incidentally, if you're looking, I was looking for an image of Thor, and I had to go through pages, and about page 4 of Google before I got one that wasn't of Chris Hemsworth. So, so he's kind of got it cornered there. There's Thor. There's also this other god, Tlaloc, the Aztec god of rain. There's the tide gods. There's storm gods. There's all sorts of different gods. But my point is that these are small gods. These gods, they don't exist anymore. No one worships them. No one really believes in them. Theologians don't write essays and have debates about these people. And the reason these gods don't really exist and are not really important to our culture anymore is because we have explanations for these things. They were conceived of to explain things that we could not explain otherwise. We now know what happens to the sun at night. We now know where thunder comes from. We now know where rain comes from. So these gods are now historical and historical interest only. They don't belong to us. They don't really infect or affect our lives as much anymore. But there's some of them still around. There are still some of them still around. And this is an example of one I think that is still believed by some people, some highly educated people. This is a depiction of the flagellum god. Michael Behe, the intelligent design creationist, he conceives of a god that goes around putting little proteins together and making these little propellers in the bacteria. This is where his God lives. He talks about evolution and everything, but if you talk to him about, well, what about how did human being, where do you see God in how humans and chimpanzees, where's the mechanism, this tiny cellular machine, or the irreducibly complex there's not, what is it that can he point to where his God is acting between humans and chimpanzees? And his God is just doing these little tinkery things, pushing proteins around and genes around, and this is just like the sun god. People didn't understand where the sun went at night, so they invented a god. Michael Behe, I'm not sure if he doesn't understand, but I'm going to be generous and say he doesn't understand how evolution can produce a bacterial flagellum. So he says, well, that's a god did it. But again, this is just another tiny god that will be thrown in a dust heap of history as soon as we figure out the details. And even if we don't figure out the details, it's a hard question. There's no reason to believe that this god is any more real than the sun god or the thunder god or the rain god. This is not a god to put your money on, I would say.
Would you like me to comment on that now?
I just want to. I can go. I just want to go on because it's kind of I'm on a thread here. So go ahead.
Okay. Yeah.
So the gods that do last.
Stop. Let me know.
Sorry.
When you have an appropriate place for me to comment in the presentation, just let me know.
Yeah. So like, there are gods that have lasting power. There's like the god of Aristotle. He conceived of God as an unmoved mover. And this is like this kind of metaphysical being, non-physical being, in which all their change and motion is contingent, but he's not itself acted upon. And that's a god that sort of has lasted through the centuries until Thomas Aquinas, the great Christian theologian, basically adopted that idea and synthesized it with Christian theology. So he came up with a number of, calls the 5 ways, which are arguments or descriptions of how God works. And this is just an example of one of them. I'll just read it through. So in the world, we see things that are possible to be and possible not to be. In other words, perishable things. But if everything were contingent and thus capable of going out of existence, then nothing would exist now. But things clearly do exist now. Therefore, there must be something that is imperishable, a necessary thing. And this everyone understands to be God. Now, obviously, I'm an atheist. I don't think he's nailed it down here and proven that there's a God. But my point is that this is a God that is still a matter of, it could still exist. It still exists in terms of people, theologians still debate and discuss this God. This is a God that could still exist, at least in principle. No one in a lab somewhere is going to say, okay, argument of contingency, that doesn't, I've disproven that doesn't, this God, we don't, I'm buried that one. So I think this is a God that, if you have to believe in a God, I would believe in this God rather than the flagellum God. This is a God that sort of is the basis of all reality, the non-contingent base of all contingencies. And it's not something that we don't have to look for these fine little gaps in our scientific knowledge to show him there. This is a God that's going to last as long as people believe in gods, I think. What's my next slide there? Yeah. Okay. And I think this is a God that's discussed in like, I don't know a lot about religions other than the big 3 in my culture: Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. But certainly, in the Old Testament, there's when God speaks about himself, he doesn't say, "I'm the God who made the flagellum. I'm the God who who made the clotting system. I'm not the God who makes this, pulls the sun across the sky in a chariot." He says, "I am that I am." And if the children of Israel ask who sent you, just say, "I am hath sent me unto you." In the New Testament, he says, "I am the Alpha, Omega, the first and the last, the beginning and the end." Again, this is not something that's going to be disproven by science, right? It's not really intruding on science's area. And then in the Quran, there is Surat al-Ikhlas, which this is often held to be the single most important surah, even though it's very short. It's just 4 quick lines, but it's supposed to distill the very essence of Allah. And this is Allah talking about himself, right? Even though he tends to talk about himself in the 3rd person in the Quran, but he's not saying, look for me in these tiny little molecular things or these things that are going on in the physical world. I'm above that. I'm eternal. I'm absolute. I'm bigger than that. So my point, I guess, is that when you're looking for, I don't know why I'm giving advice to someone who wants to believe in God, but if you have to believe in God, I don't really understand why you would believe in these, what I call small gods. It kind of gets back to what you were saying earlier. Like, what is the important part of faith? Is it really important to someone's faith that evolution didn't produce the bacterial flagellum? Is it really important that our bodies, our physical body, had to have been created by some means other than evolution, other than descent from a common ancestor with chimpanzees and everything else? Is that are these the important parts of faith, or is faith concerned with other things, not the things? Because like if you're if you're basing your faith as, or if you're seeing your faith as something that tries to address these other questions, science has that covered. And science has a means of answering these questions, addressing these questions, and determining whether these things are true or false. Now, faith, again, I think you disagree from what we said earlier. I'm not sure you agree, but I don't really see how things that are taken on faith can be tested in the same way. And I don't see why you would include things that fall within the purview of science within your faith and make your faith contingent on those things. So, like, why would you make your faith based, an essential part of your faith be that the earth is 6,000 years old, when that's flatly wrong? And now you have to start making excuses to deny the science, or that, again, that common ancestry is not true. That, again, is that really the most important thing that faith is supposed to impart to your life? So that's where I want to leave off. Those are questions, I guess.
Okay, so let me comment on that. So yes, I agree with you actually on something that which I already said, that I don't think that somebody becomes a Christian or a Muslim or a Jew or a Hindu because he thinks that Islam is going to teach him biology or physics. This is not the reason people become religious. That the big questions are the ones that are answered by big answers like God. Okay, so the problem is that atheism, let's say, or naturalism, to be more accurate, that naturalism came maybe through the last couple of centuries, and said, I will put a different worldview that will offer answers to the big questions. Okay, so what are the big questions? Somebody would like to be worshiping God who created the universe, who created life, who created consciousness, who has given free will to us, who is able to resurrect us and hold people accountable for what they did, and hence fulfill justice. These are the big questions that people would like to have answers for, and for which they are looking for a true religion to give them true answers. So where did we come from? What is the purpose of this life? Where are we going after? And is there going to be ultimate justice or not? These are the big questions.
Mm-hmm. But how do you know the answer to those questions? I understand that religion and faith suggests answers for these, but they all have different answers to, or, there's commonalities, but there are differences too. And this is where, again, I've been mostly talking about science, but I think there are often like moral disagreements between people that are in part faith. So there are questions like abortion and gay rights and women's rights and things like that are where the battle lines are often drawn amongst between people of faith, people of different faiths, or people of faith and people not of faith. And if someone is making an argument, okay, here's why I think, say abortion is permissible, and just comes up with an argument about that, and someone else says, well, my God says it's not permissible, and everything my God says is right, so that means abortion is not permissible. How do you resolve that?
Okay, so let's agree first that those are the big questions. So with
They're
the
big questions. I think there are big questions. I guess my point is that I don't know if then you have. I think those questions are answerable within naturalism. I think I'm not. I don't consider myself a naturalist. Not so much that I believe in things that are considered supernatural, but just because that's taking a metaphysical position, and I basically I don't think metaphysical positions can ever really be settled to the point that I would call myself this or that. So that's more. But I think in practice, I probably live my life as a naturalist. But I don't see, again, if you're talking about personal, what gives personal meaning to you, then I think sure, whatever. Like I think, I don't describe myself as a person of faith, but I think probably the closest thing and that I would have is I'm not just a psychiatrist, but I'm a psychoanalyst, and that really makes me kind of this old-fashioned, almost like a Luddite within my field. Um, and because they're really, psychoanalysis was initially promoted as a scientific discipline, that this was how the brain works, this was how the mind works, and I don't think it's really turned out that way. There's not a lot of support for psychoanalysis and neuroscience. Nonetheless, I do find it, like when I'm talking with patients or when I'm looking at a movie or reading a book, I find that this is kind of a framework that makes sense to me, and I can kind of understand what my patients are saying and say things to them, and I can interpret a novel or a movie in with regards to this. So it's like a set of principles and a framework in which I kind of see the world. Why did I go on that tangent? So I mean, I think I don't think I'm a person of faith, but I think that's. But then I also I don't take it as something like if Freud said this, then I have to believe it because he said it. And but when you talk about morality and things like that, this is a way that faith is often it's like okay, this omnipotent, omniscient person said this, I'm going to have to go along with it, even if it doesn't make sense, and even if the other people in my culture don't agree with it. And if you want to go along with that, that's okay. But eventually, there gets to a point where we're in a culture where different people of different backgrounds are coexisting, and how do we determine what the best rules, the best laws, the best moral principles are for that, for us as a whole? And I think the only thing we can do is take basically a scientific approach to it, which is using the evidence of things that actually happen, outcomes, things that are in experience, and trying to reason through what's going to be the best solution for that we can come up with that will work the best in our society. And if it's faith, can you do that? Or is it like if you believe God has told you this and you think, well, it doesn't make sense to me, but he knows best. Like I remember when I was a kid and I was going to some Islamic education, and someone asked us, why does Allah not say we can eat pork? Why can we not eat pork? And people came up with, well, it's unhealthy. He says, well, it's unhealthy, but so is beef's unhealthy, milk's unhealthy, smoking's unhealthy, all sorts of things are unhealthy. Milkshakes are unhealthy. So why? And people said, it's low quality meat. He says, no, have you ever had, a really nice pork loin? I don't know how this guy knew what they tasted like, but and in the end he said, Allah said it, we have to follow it. We don't know why, but this is a rule he made. We just have to go along with it. And, that's a harmless rule. But there are other rules that impinge on people's lives who don't, if other people want to eat pork, let them, right? But
So let me give you a complete answer for what you said, and I will start top down. Yeah. So religion is there to answer the big questions, and once you settle the big questions, you take the smaller ones on faith. Okay. So existential questions are the biggest questions since human history. The reason that people are seeking them is that they are compelling. We believe inside that things need have a reason, and then the first question is, why is there anything? Why is there a universe? Why is there Earth? Why is there humanity? What am I doing here? If you wake up somewhere and you have lost memory, have amnesia, then the first question is, why am I here? Who I am, and who brought me here? This is immediately the first question. If somebody knocks you out and you wake up 10 days or 1 month later in a place, then what happened is the first thing that you will ask. You will not assume that you disappeared and you appeared and this is a natural thing. So the existential questions are compelling because we want reasons and we want to understand from where and to where and why. These are the big questions. And so the big questions are, why is there a universe? And then there can be somebody created it, or it created itself, or this is a fiction and we're making it up in our minds, or there has to be an answer. Okay, why is there life and why is there no life?
Well,
why is there living things is a question that we need to answer. Okay, why is there humans who have conscious and tables that do not have conscious is something we need to answer. Why do we have the ability to make up rules while, for example, a tiger or a lion or a cat will live the way a cat lives? They will not like to eat vegetables, for example, or rebel against the cat way of life. But humans can rebel against the caste system, for example, or feudal system, or the aristocratic system, or whatever. Okay, and have a new system because we don't like it. We don't accept that this should be the human condition. We have ideals. We have things, and this is the reason that those questions are there. And those questions, to be honest with you, are not the type of questions that you can have through discussion or through the scientific method, because rich people will always want capitalism to rule, and poorer people will want socialism or communism to rule, or whatever system that would give them riches or will redistribute things. And people of the upper class maybe would like feudalism to be the thing, or people who are, I don't know, in India, the caste system, for example, had obvious benefits for people on the better side of it, and disadvantages for other people, etc. So there are some questions that people will just struggle and fight against each other, and they will not be solved by reason. So then you have those three categories of things. Number one, the existential questions that relate to why. Why is there anything, be it the universe, Earth, and life, and humanity, and consciousness? So this is one category. And the second category of purpose, why? Okay. And the third category of how is this going to end, the destination. And science will any answer that science or human intellect will give to those kinds of things will be based on opinion or speculation. But there are people who believe that there is real truth. Okay, speculations will remain speculations. Mathematical models will remain mathematical models. So, for example, our friend Otangiro here is putting this question, for example. Why did nature select those specific 20 amino acids other than any other combination? Or why the origin of life cannot be explained, or this or that. Those are questions. Why are those questions there? I do not want to answer really the questions, but why are those questions there? Yeah. Because it is our nature to ask.
Yeah, I'm very.
So it is our nature to ask those questions. So now, I'm
very humbled that Artangelo thinks I can answer these questions.
No, I think he's mentioning them.
Questions.
I think he's mentioning them as an example. But the point is The point is that you and me and everybody else will try to find a credible source to give him an answer. Okay? Now, science is a credible source. Science is a credible source because you can test things, etc. But it is a credible source within its scope. Now, the question is, are those questions within the scope of science? Science will not tell you your purpose. Science will tell you maybe how you function, but will not tell you your purpose. Okay, so I cannot make a scientific experiment, for example, to say if there is life after death or not. Because
Some
then,
people say you can.
yeah,
Some people say,
God,
yeah,
because
people
God is telling.
There's an experiment that was done recently. It failed, but they put what they did was they put not exactly life out after death, but what they did was they in the resuscitation room in an emergency department, they put items on top of a shelf that was that could be visible from the ceiling, but not from anyone walking on the floor. And what they wanted to test were these stories of people who like their hearts are arrested and they're unconscious, and then they'll say they floated up above the room and they saw the doctors trying to and they went to the other room and saw their families crying, and then they often go up to heaven and meet whichever God they happen to believe in. Curiously, everyone happens to believe in, meet the God that they wanted to meet, and then then they come back to life and they come back down. And so they tested this to see if could people really see the things, if they're really floating above the ceiling, around the ceiling, can they see these things? And unfortunately, they didn't get anyone who could say, yeah, I saw that fire truck or whatever they put up there. But they didn't think they got enough evidence to make a conclusive thing. And I think I think they really wanted a positive result, and so they tried to soft pedal. But the fact is, I give them full credit for like trying to I think that was a legitimate model, that a legitimate design for a study to actually try to figure this thing out. And if they had, I would have had to eat crow if they say, well, look, these people were, every time they had a cardiac arrest, they were able to tell us exactly what was written on those shelves. So, but they didn't. So
the topic is now, this is a fun example, and it's a funny one too, because when we're talking about life after death, we are not talking about near-death experiences. You need to kill somebody, really, but once you kill him...
No, I mean, that's one of my... Yeah. But at least
once you kill him, you cannot bring him back. So.
You can show consciousness not being confined to the body. I think it would have shown that when, like, this idea that consciousness can kind of leave the body, even that's kind of because you can actually induce out-of-body experiences. But if you're actually seeing things that you could not possibly see with your physical eyes.
I'll tell you something. If I'm in an operating room and I am dying and my soul is getting out of my body, I will not really be looking for what is on the ceiling. I will be looking for something else completely.
That's one of the things that like, it's a very mundane. Like, one thing I always wonder about, like they say, your body, your soul is confined to your body, and then it goes out and then it's free. But it's always, people always describe it as if they're in their body. So like, you're looking, like, you can see what's in front of your face and you're looking this way and that way. Like, that's not, why would your soul have to look through your eyes and hear through your ears? And it doesn't make sense to me. So that's one of the reasons why I don't find this compelling evidence. But
to complete my reply,
so
people will accept, for example, the philosophical aspects that you said, arguments from contingency, kalam cosmological argument, something does not come out of nothing, causality rules, principle of sufficient reason, etc. They accept those as basic premises for thinking logically, and they concede that a universe needs a creator and life does not seem material, and we feel that we are different than tables and chairs, and so we understand that life is different from non-life, and that consciousness and free will is different than a robot that actually moves and exhibits things that look like life. But we know that we are different than other things that we see, and that we're different versus our laptops and computers. And people will concede that there is a creator. Now, the question is, which is his true message, how can we authenticate it, okay? And then we have the answers to those big questions. So on all three religions that you have talked about, the answer will be God created the universe, God created life, God gave us free will, we are here to worship, and at the end, people who have lived their life according to his doctrine will be in a good place, and those who didn't will be in a bad place. So you have the answers. Now, some people will take this further, and some people will be content with this as the answer to the big things, and they will focus on the way of living their life. And then enters naturalism, which where I wanted to continue. Enters naturalism. It says, guys, I am going to give you different set of answers, okay? There has been always a universe. You don't need, for example, to look for a creator, or the universe happened by chance and there is fluctuation in quantum fields or whatever other things, or it's cyclic, or time turns to space and wraps and whatever, blah, blah, blah. So you don't need to look for a beginning of the universe. And if you look for a beginning of the universe and consider it mandatory, then what is the beginning of your God? Whatever. So they will tell you, okay, the answer to this first question is that thing. And since it came here by chance, then there is no purpose, so stop looking for purpose. And your and life is exactly the same. The chair and you as a person are the same, except that you are a complicated machine. And consciousness is a trick played upon you by your brain. And there is no free will because everything is deterministic, because there are laws of physics. And if you set the initial conditions for something, everything else is like a machine. And since all of this is, the existence is chance, and consciousness is a trick, and free will is an illusion, and then there is no purpose, it means there is nothing after that. So this is essentially a very obvious replacement to religion. It is a religion, actually, because it will also lead you to the point that the way to live our life, the doctrine of living our life, morality and ethics and everything else is not objective, it's subjective. And then it is subject to dialogue that whatever number of people or people at a certain point of time would think is good for them, they can just do it and agree upon them. And if it's a mistake, they will use the scientific method or some other method to do an inference of what they did wrong and try to correct it. People will suffer for a few decades or few centuries under a corrupt system, but then maybe people after some generations will not suffer because the people who will come later will do something better. So people will suffer, for example, under communism for 100 years, but okay, we will learn the lesson and make something better, etc. So everything becomes subjective and subject to that. Why do people then go to the smaller questions that you put on the table, Faisal? Why do people look at flagella, for example, and try to say this is not consistent with religion, or at a cat or a flower or whatever? It is because those things are said under this concept that they have come randomly. So people look for examples that, given you look to them in a rational or reasonable way, you will not accept, given human reason, that those things came by chance. So they appeal to things that have obvious design or obvious complexity or obvious integrated system look, or what they call specified I can't remember the example, the term, specific complexity.
That's like complex information, yeah.
Yeah, or they are based on information, or they are based on a blueprint, etc. And they would tell you, if your worldview is that the universe and life and the systems that you have around you are based on chance, explain this. This does not look like being based on chance, and there is no point. So the naturalists will say, there is no point because we do not know. Later we will know. This will be the answer. The other worldview will go like, it is not a matter of we will know or not. It is a matter of, even if we know, the fact that something like this exists in life, in this universe, means that this universe is not just like floating there by chance. Because for something to appear in this way, it means it is guided in a specific way or the other. Even if you find an explanation that is good in terms of methodological naturalism, the reason it is there in the universe within the laws of the physical laws of the universe means that those physical laws were made like that, so that this becomes the final result. So the reason people of faith having specific positions towards things that you might see as part of science is not because they are imposing faith into science. It is because this is essentially a clash of worldview, where they would say even science is good because it is showing us that the universe has underlying intelligence, purpose, and guidance, while the other worldview is science is showing us those things. What we understand, we understand. What we don't understand, we will not appear to anything outside nature. There is no intelligence, there is no underlying consciousness, there is nothing. There is only things that we know and things that we do not know. So this is the reason. It is completely different from the sun god thing. Because, for example, Islam and Christianity does not say, or at least Islam does not say something that when we knew about the motion of the sun, for example, we got shocked. There is no contradiction, really. It is the premise there. The Quran or the Bible are not science books. The trick is that there should not be direct contradiction. They are systems that answer existential questions. They give you a way of living that is consistent with a moral system, that when you fulfill, you will have a good destiny in the afterlife. They tell you things that can never be tested by science and cannot be agreed upon by human dialogue, because we are biased creatures. And hence, to a religious person, let's say to somebody of faith like me, science is a good tool to verify my faith, not the other way around. I don't see any contradiction between science and my faith. I just say, for specific things that God has unequivocally said that it is his making outside of causality, I will tell you, if you do not give me a very good explanation for that, I will say it's God, for very specific things. Okay? Like our consciousness, like our free will, for example, because God says that this is the effect of a soul. And science cannot negate the existence of a soul. That I tell you that God says that we will be resurrected after death. Science can say nothing about that, because somebody who dies does not return. And judgment didn't happen yet, etc. So I think that the matter of thinking for a God for small topics or big topics, it's not like that. You always find a God for the big topics, and then you take the smaller topics as his advice, because you accept him and you know he knows best. And you always have this litmus test that scientifically verified, undisputable facts will not contradict with a true religion. And for example, to conclude my comments, for me as a Muslim, I find that I live very consistently between my faith and science. I like science. And even if I have a specific position towards a certain theory or not, if the theory of evolution tomorrow is an undisputed fact, okay?
Actually, it was yesterday, so you're a couple days late.
If tomorrow or yesterday, it doesn't make a difference. If it is an undisputed fact, it will probably not have an effect on my faith. I just reject it because it's false. Nothing else. So these are my comments about the aspect of God and religion and science or whatnot. So what's your comment on that? So maybe we can conclude after this.
Oh, let's see. I'm not sure if that's a lot there. You talked about the why questions, and I think why is a pretty tricky, slippery word. to use in these kinds, because there's two very different meanings of the why. The why is that,
Our friend Otangu here, just that so I
yeah,
don't neglect him, is
yeah.
saying something like this, the same thing, that naturalism will come
I,
from randomness
you
and
know,
hence no intelligence. So this
yeah,
is this almost the same thing always.
perfectly.
He's a Christian, by the way. So
Sorry.
yeah,
Yeah,
Otanjiro is a Christian, by the way. But
yeah,
it,
I know Tangelo
you're
quite
saying the
well.
same
To be
thing. Yeah.
quite frank, I'd rather just not have him input into this thing. That enough run-ins with it. Although we have something in common, we are both enthusiasts of high efficiency horn audio speakers. He has some very impressive speakers that he has made and put up on YouTube. And this is so, and no matter how different you are, any human being can find something that you have in common. But okay, why is a slippery word. It can be like, why, why did I break my leg? Well, because the ice was slippery, I fell on the pavement. The physical forces were such that the bones fractured, and that's why I broke my leg. Okay, why did I break my leg when tomorrow is this big race that I was planning on and looking forward to? It was the championship or whatever. That's a question that people will ask themselves. Why did this have to happen? Why did it have to happen to me? The fact that people will ask this question doesn't mean it's a valid question, does not mean it's a question that can be answered. Why did you break a leg? The answers, the answers that for the first question, that's it. Those cover the bases, and the fact that you had the championship race tomorrow, that doesn't, it's not, the universe telling you something. Someone might say, I was too proud, I should focus on the more important thing, I neglected my family because I was training to obsess with training, and this is a message to me, and now I will pay more attention to my loved ones. If that's what you learn from it, great, but that's not why you broke your leg. And I think, what you really, I would say from what most of what you said explains why there is religion, because we as human beings are just, as organisms, these are questions we ask, these different kind of why questions, and we really don't like not having answers for them. So religion is one of the ways to answer these kinds of why questions, but the universe doesn't really owe us answers to these questions. I Tell me what is wrong if with the naturalistic view, that there is, like, say that that's one view that's out there. I accept you disagree with it, but what's wrong? What would be wrong with a society that is primarily, everyone is mostly naturalists, and they, like, what is wrong with such a
because
worldview, that
because
the things you talk about, that there is no meaning, we're not brought here for a purpose, um, free will and consciousness, these may well be illusory things. They don't really exist. It's hard to demonstrate that they exist. Say that that's someone's best reading of all the evidence available to them, and so they live their life accordingly. What's wrong with that?
the thing that is wrong with it, because I read plenty about philosophical naturalism even when I was a teenager, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when you read it, it's, on the surface, it's telling you this, that physical things have physical things that move them, and you don't need to get out of that. There is nothing other than that. But when you really look around you, honestly, Faisal, I'm telling you, um, that everything is physical at the end of the day, and that using methodological thinking, you can find always physical explanations for things. It's totally contradiction to observation, really. Uh, uh, to observation of the universe as it is around us. When as a child or as an adult, you see a car in the middle of the desert, you know that the car is different from the desert. Yeah. There is an obvious distinction between a car.
The car is different from the lizard that's crawling there too.
Yeah, absolutely. But the car is different from a rock and from sand.
And so is the lizard.
So when you look at a car,
the lizard evolved. The car was designed from a person.
So when you
things.
When you look
a card is not an organism that occurs naturally. Like if you have an island where that no human beings have ever been, and you go there and you find lizards, you say, of course, lizards are natural. They occur naturally.
No, this was not
a car there. Then you say, okay, there was a human being here. It's not because the car is complex and the rock isn't. It's Okay, go ahead.
This is not what I was going to say. I'm saying that if you look at a car and the desert around it, you notice that this is different. If you also look at a lizard and the desert around it, you know that it is different.
Yeah.
Okay. You know that using wind and using a storm and an earthquake and a volcano, it will not create a lizard. It will not create a car. When you go into anatomy, you will find that a lizard is really very complicated.
Yeah.
And the more we get science, when you look at the very simplest bacterium, you know it's very complicated.
Yeah.
And everything that we have learned and every experience that we have had as human beings who have intellect, and we only have our intellect, we have nothing else, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that making magnificent things and complex things involves thinking.
No, we don't know that at all. We don't know that at all.
It just doesn't.
To steal one of Joshua Swamidas's, is Mount Everest not magnificent? Who built Mount Everest? Which human being built Mount Everest?
No, this is now poetic magnificence is different. Is completely different. Having rocks in a certain shape is completely different than bringing a piece of rock and carving it into something that obviously resembles something else that is not typically a rock. Okay,
right. That's how we tell it. Yeah. It's not because the rock is more complex. If you have a rock that's in a perfect cube and it's granite, we know that nature does not produce such things, but human beings do. So that is why we know the cubical rock was designed. The lizard, we know, comes from natural things. There's no other creature that fabricates a lizard. A lizard is born of other lizards. So that's why we consider the lizard part of the natural world. It's not part of the artificial world. Now there is this conflation, this confusion that the creationists do, is saying that we recognize it because it's complex, but it's not that we recognize the car as designed because complex. We recognize it because it's not natural. It does not, there are no natural processes we know of that produce cars. There are natural processes that produce lizards. That's the distinction we make between the two of them. And the creationists try to change that into knows because because you can know what a car is and you know it's designed. And it's a very bad argument. I'm sorry.
And this is exactly why exactly what you have said now is exactly why religious people are more likely to take positions against the theory of evolution. Because in my perspective, and in many other people's perspective, even a person like Joshua Swamidas, when I had a long interview with him, two of them actually, will not tell you that the lizard happened by chance. He believes that there is design. There is design behind both Mount Everest and the lizard.
Yeah.
He is not saying.
There's design. That's like the big God I was talking about.
So, and I also believe that there is design behind both. But I mean that the case for design is much more obvious in a lizard or a flagellum or DNA material being transcribed by machines or ATP cycles in the cell producing energy, etc. These are very clear things for design, because maybe the other things we got so used to. We see mountains and sky and clouds many, but when we look at anatomy of creatures and when we look at how life is, it's striking.
Yeah.
So the point is, this is why. This is
one of the things. These are amazing things.
I just want to make the point here that when I told you, if evolution turns out to be a thing, why will it not affect my position? Because if it turns out that mutations are really responsible for something, you will find that religious people will, at the end of the day, say, okay, God uses mutations, because mutations being random will not typically, in our experience, random things do not cause organized things. So at the end of the day,
and that's not true, because here we are, right?
But you say
things by themselves. But when you have random things that are able to persist, their forms are able to persist through time, not as an individual instance, but through replication, then everything goes out the window. And what you have is this is the most profound thing that Darwin has taught us, is that if you have something that will replicate, it can now, like if you have just like a piece of rock sitting there, it's not going to grow more complex over time, because it's just going to be subject to the forces that cause it to degrade. But if you have a structure that will persist over time in numerous examples of itself by being reproduced, then it can function, then it can persist as long as there's the conditions around to allow it to survive. But the bigger thing is, if it doesn't replicate perfectly, then there will be variations that arise, and some of these variations will not persist as long, but others will persist better. And once you have that imperfect replication, then you now have the fact that over time this structure can become more complex, more likely to persist, and over the unfathomable period of time, these billions of years, that's how we get here. That's how we and the lizards and every other living thing get here. Even in theory, like if someone just promoted this as a speculative idea, it makes sense. It is something that is possible, how complexity can arise without it's what the philosopher Daniel Dennett says. There's top-down complexity. This is bottom-up complexity, and the top-down complexity in his view arises from the bottom up. That's how we get designers who can now do top-down complexity. Here's the thing: is that it's amazing, it's astonishing, it's hard to believe. This biology is amazing. There's never going to be an explanation. If you're looking for an explanation that's mundane and easy to understand and easy to accept, we're not going to get that. This is going to be amazing and astonishing. I mean, do you think it's just boring that, if Allah created human beings, is that just boring and easy to believe and easy to understand? No, it's awesome, right? There's whatever does this is going to be something amazing and awesome. There's just no simple, mundane way to get like things like you and I, and things that can build computers or our cat or whatever, or the lizards or spider. These are just the most amazing things in the universe. And so there's going to be it's going to be astonishing how the process that brings these two, and it's going to be hard to really believe in, but we have to put our preconceptions aside and just accept the facts that are there.
Yeah, one of the reasons I don't accept this thing about evolution at all is that we have something in engineering, even in electronics and communication specifically, called genetic algorithms. Okay.
Right.
which are primarily algorithms based on the exact same principles like Darwinian evolution. Okay, so you want to design, because, for example, designing antennas is very difficult because there are so many parameters.
Yeah.
So you would start with an antenna, and then you would create changes to the parameters, and then you would create populations of antennas, and then you would eliminate some of them. You don't do it yourself, because you generate a huge number of them, and then this genetic algorithm will at the end produce a better antenna.
Do you actually create the antennas, or do you create the is it like the computer, like a simulation?
Yeah, you create a computer simulation.
Yeah.
So the simulation will you will have layers of simulations. So something changes the parameter, and then this will give this to another system that will calculate the effect of the change of the parameter, etc.
Right.
And then at the end of the day, you would this is possible now because we have the computing power. So at the end of the day, you would end up with the computer recommending to you that this design of the antenna, these lengths and breadths and etc. changes, and sometimes even the components, etc. will be a better antenna than the first one.
So that seems like a good idea, because so the random mutations and selection came up with a better solution than intelligent design. Yeah.
So the reason I do not accept Darwinian evolution is specifically because I have experience in that. And I am really very frustrated when I am talking to people who are explaining evolution, and they appeal to that, because we do this as engineers, communication, electronics engineers, and information system engineers, and it doesn't work this way, because you set up the problem in a way that you are giving the genetic algorithm a specific objective.
Right.
Okay. And it creates the variation. It creates it within limits, because if you open the space, it will never finish. So you always need to start it near the solution. You know that you have a hunch from your experience that the design of the antenna should be in this range.
Right.
And you start with a design that is within the range, but because small changes can cause big effects, and you want it really to be very well tuned, because you want to create an antenna for 5G or for a mobile phone that you want it to be very efficient, and it's very hard competition. You want the optimal solution. So number one, you started from a place
that is a question. Like you don't want just something that's going to be good at something. You want something that's good at very specific task, right?
Yeah. So number one, you started very close to the solution. Number two, you give it ranges. Number three, you give it objective function based on your experience. Right. And it is always evaluating the options and eliminating things. Otherwise, it will need infinite computing power.
Right.
So at the end, when people appeal to these things and say, according to our latest knowledge of computer technology and simulations, etc., random mutations can do things that are better than design, they don't know what is really happening in engineering. It is not this way. The very best engineers who can guess a solution that is close to the proper solution, and who can put objective functions and penalty functions that will eliminate things out of the domain and converge fast to the solution, are the ones that get those algorithms to produce something. The algorithms are just saving your time, because if you do the trial and error alone outside of the computer, you will take 1,000,000 years. It's trying so many things, and you are directing it. And it's not trying stupid things. But when you look at the papers that relate, Faisal, to evolutionary biology, and you look at the core facts on the ground, natural selection is damn stupid. It does not do this. It is not a real Darwinian mechanism. It does not do this. Natural selection. I'll give you one example, and then we will need to finish that. And this example was really striking to me. For example, when you are looking at the transition from a single a unicellular organism to a multicellular organism, okay? What they say is that unicellular organisms came together and became colonies, and then the colonies, cooperated together, and the cooperation eventually turned into an organism, a multicellular organism. But when you go and look at the papers on the ground, you find that when a colony happens, there are cells that are called cheaters, okay? And what the cheaters do is that they take more than they give. And since the other cells are innocent, okay, those cheaters, they get away with this. And this causes, at the end of the day, the breakdown of the colony. It is like human society. People who are parasitic, who are criminals, if there is no law and order to identify them and throw them away, what they do, they corrupt the society and they cause its failure. So it is not possible comparing what is really happening on the ground in engineering and looking at what is really happening on the ground in biology to say that a colony will come together and create a multicellular organism because natural selection is going to do the work. Natural selection will favor cheaters. And I can show you a paper that says this: natural selection favors the cheater. This is what happens, because what happens on the ground is that the cheater will take more food. It will be able to replicate more than the other cells that are really contributing. Okay, and eventually cheaters become dominant. And when everybody is cheating, the colony breaks down because you cannot cheat the cheaters. Everybody's cheating, so nobody's giving to the colony. So at the end of the day, the colony breaks down, especially when the conditions enable it. So I'm telling you this: the natural selection that is described by evolutionary biology and mutation that is really random, that is described by evolutionary biology, will never lead to a lizard. It is impossible to lead to it will never lead to a flagellum. The only way it will lead to a flagellum is that it will be working the same way we use random changes and a selection system in engineering, where somebody is setting up the domain, somebody knows what solution he wants, and somebody is directing the objective function and causing cheaters to be thrown away and the good designs to survive so that you will replicate the better designs. Natural selection and random mutation, as described by microbiology and by evolutionary biology, does not do this. So there will be two types of people at the end of the day, Faisal. People who will say, okay, God created the whole thing, and people will say God directs. So random mutation is not really random, and natural selection is not really natural. I don't mind which one of them somebody selects if he has proper reasons to think. But I really mind if somebody says natural selection, the way it is defined by Darwinian evolution, and mutation, the way it is defined by Darwinian evolution, can cause a lizard. Because it can't. If somebody can prove to me mathematically, okay, that it can, I will be happy to entertain it. But even population genetics, which is the mathematical model of evolution, does not have a model for evolution to account for novelty. It cannot make a lizard. It can only make lizards that already exist have a different color in a different environment. But it cannot make the lizard itself. So this is the whole trick. And the whole trick goes to the same philosophical question that we started with the big questions. How did this place arrive? How did complex things like life arrive? How did consciousness and free will arrive? And if those are arriving by an intelligent creator, then the question is, does he care or not? And you answer this question if he communicates. And religion is a way of communication. He sends a message. And then you will need to be serious about it. You will either open up the message and know what is inside there to see if he cares and what is his directives, and understand what are the consequences of his directives. And if it is as dangerous as and as important as determining your destiny, then it is worth it to look into it. So I would like to close here, and if you have some closing remarks, we call it a day.
I'm not sure how to respond to that. I mean, it just doesn't. You've made a number of very obviously heartfelt and strong claims that you obviously believe quite strongly, but you didn't provide any back. All you provided was your incredulity and your refusal to accept that. Like, there is a lots of, the literature on population genetics and other things are just, I'm just not satisfied that you're familiar enough with them to really justify the vociferousness with which you reject those findings. So, but I'm not really, I'm not the person to really go through all that. I mean, I'll just it's one thing that struck me in your discussion with Joshua and was that where you were going back and forth on population genetics, and he was talking about some simulations that had been, that he had been run, and you said, oh, I ran those simulations and they don't work. And then he was asking you, well, did you account for recombination, and what what program did you use? And you said, oh, I didn't use a program. I just did it on pen and paper. And Joshua got about as, you know, he's a very nice guy. And I think he got as stern as he possibly could in that situation. And said, oh, you can't do this on pen and paper.
I actually said I did the calculation of the simulation.
Yeah.
Then he suggested that the calculation is not enough, and you would rather do it by a simulation. And
well,
actually,
one thing
that I will do.
You have to know. You know, frankly, you have to know what you're doing.
One thing that I will do in this evolution course is that I will actually put my calculation. I will put it there, and I will ask people, even on
what I will ask you is that you don't just put up your calculation, but you run it, you get it peer reviewed by someone who actually knows how to do these calculations.
I will show it to the people
and can confirm that you haven't made some silly mistake. I mean, because
I don't think so. Because
I know you don't think so. I don't know. It's been a discussion here. I'm sorry to end on kind of a negative.
What about the bigger question? What about the bigger questions, by the way? What about the bigger questions? What about Pascal's wager? You know, I would like to get your final comment on that. Are you aware of Pascal's wager?
Sorry.
Yeah, Pascal's wager is it goes like this.
Yeah, I know Pascal's wager. You know what?
Let's explain it to the audience. So
I have to make my best decision based on what I do, and if it turns out like the consequences are greater for, you know, I don't think frankly, I'm not convinced that even if there is a God, he would say, well, if you say you believe me because you think it's in your best interest, but you don't really believe it, that's going to do me any favors. So I think there's other aspects of Pascal's wager. I think, I'm kind of surprised that we ended up with that, because frankly think that's one of the sillier arguments for theism.
It is, because at the end of the day, it is this. Because at the end of the day, as you said, you know, and I actually accept it also, and actually I said it even before you said it, that the scope for faith and the scope for science are actually complementary, not contradictory. Except when science tries to step into the area of religion, or religion tries to step into the area of science, this is where there is a problem. Yeah. But typically they are complementary and they help each other. And now the very question of faith, which is something that relates to our destiny, involves an element of risk. So believing in science does not solve that. You have to have an answer for that. This is an important thing.
Yeah. Whereas I think our lives are best served by just sticking with the things we know are true about our world and about each other. And if we start to hold as knowledge things that are only things that we believe, but we don't have good reason for believing them, then that just makes the whole human enterprise. It gets back to where I started from. You know, if we believe things that are not true just because we believe them, that's going to be bad news for us. We're just past the point where we can afford that. We're not gonna make it. We're gonna join the many species who evolution has weeded out over the billions of years, and we had a good run. But I think we're at the point where it's up to us to decide which way we're gonna go. So that's not cheerful.
Did you enjoy it? Did you enjoy the discussion? Is my
I did very much. Yes, I did.
Same here.
I really enjoyed it. And if there's another subject you want to discuss, I'm happy to do it. This has been
maybe we
done one of these before. So I hope I don't know if anyone was watching. I hope other people enjoyed it too.
I think there were like some 30 persons who went in and out, according to the statistics I'm getting from YouTube. But I think it was fun. The important thing, it was fun, and other people will watch it too. And I think they will find it was fun. And thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation.
And maybe we do it again some other time.
Okay. Very good.
So peace be upon everybody, and Assalamu alaikum, and thank you, Faisal. And see you again on social media or on YouTube. Okay?
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Assalamu alaikum.